Harry Potter, Chapter 5, Diagon Alley. Harry woke up early the next morning. Although he could tell it was daylight, he kept his eyes shut tight. It was a dream, he told himself firmly. I dreamed a giant called Hagrid came to tell me I was going to a school for wizards. When I open my eyes, I'll be at home in my cupboard. There was suddenly a loud tapping noise, and there's Aunt Petunia knocking on the door. Harry thought, his heart sinking, but he still didn't open his eyes. It had been such a good dream. Tap, tap, tap. All right, Harry mumbled. I'm getting up. He sat up and Hagrid's heavy coat fell off him. The hut was full of sunlight. The storm was over. Hagrid himself was asleep on the collapsed sofa, and there was an owl rapping its claw on the window, a newspaper held in its beak. Harry scrambled to his feet, so happy he felt as though a large balloon was swelling inside him. He went straight to the window and jerked it open. The owl swooped in and dropped the newspaper on top of Hagrid, who didn't wake up. The owl then fluttered onto the floor and began to attack Hagrid's coat. Don't do that. Harry tried to wave the owl out of the way, but it snapped its beak fiercely at him and carried on savaging the coat. Hagrid, said Harry loudly, there's an owl. Pay him. Hagrid grunted onto the sofa. What? He wants paying for delivering the newspaper. Look in the pockets. Hagrid's coat seemed to be made of nothing but pockets. Bunches of keys, slug pellets, balls of string, peppermint humpsbugs, tea bags. Finally, Harry pulled out a handful of strange-looking coins. Give him 5 nuts, said Hagrid sleepily. Nuts? The little bronze ones. Harry counted out 5 little bronze coins, and the owl held out its legs so Harry could pull the money into a small leather pouch tied to it. Then he flew off through the open window. Hagrid yawned loudly and sat up and stretched. Best be off, Harry. Lots to do today. Gotta get up to London and buy all your stuff for school. Harry was turning over the wizard coins and looking at them. He had just thought of something that made him feel as though the happy balloon inside him had got a puncture. Hagrid? Said Hagrid, who was pulling on his huge boots. I haven't got any money. And you heard Uncle Vernon last night. He won't pay me for to go and learn magic. Don't worry about that, said Hagrid, standing up and scratching his head. Do you think your parents didn't leave you anything? But if their house was destroyed, they didn't keep their girl in the house, boy. Nah, first stop for us is Gringotts, the wizard's bank. Have a sausage. They are not bad cold, and I wouldn't say no to a bed or birthday cake neither. Wizard's banks? Just the one, Gringotts, run by goblins. Harry dropped the bit of sausage he was holding. Goblins? Yeah, so you'd be mad to try and rob it. I'll tell you that, Harry. Never mess with the goblins. Gringotts is the safest place in the world for anything you want to keep safe, except maybe Hogwarts. As a matter of fact, I gotta visit Gringotts anyway, for Dumbledore Hogwarts business. Hagrid drew himself up proudly. He usually gets me to do important stuff for him, fetching you, getting things from Gringotts. Knows that he can trust me, say. Got everything. Come on then. Harry followed Hagrid onto the rock. The sky was quite clear now, and the sea gleamed in the sunlight. The boat Uncle Vernon had hired was still there, with a lot of water in the bottom after the storm. How did you get here? Harry asked, looking around for another boat. Flew, said Hagrid. Flew? Yeah, but we will go back in this. Not supposed to use magic now, I have got ya. They settled down on the boat. Harry was still staring at Hagrid, trying to imagine him flying. Seems a shame to row though, said Hagrid, giving Harry another of his sideways look. If I was to, speed things up a bit, would you mind not mentioning it at Hogwarts? Of course not, said Harry, eager to see more magic. Hagrid pulled out the pink umbrella again, tapped it twice on the side of the boat, and they sped off towards the land. Why would you be mad to try and rob Gringotts? Asked Harry. Spells, enchantments, said Hagrid, unfolding his newspaper as he spoke. They say there's a dragon guarding the high security walls, and then you gotta find your way. Gringotts is 100 miles under London, say. Deep under the underground. You die of hunger trying to get out, even if you manage to get your hands on something. Harry sat and thought about this while Hagrid read his newspaper, the Daily Prophet. Harry had learned from his uncle that people like to be left alone while they did this, but it was very difficult. He had never had so many questions in his life. Ministry of Magic messes things up as usual, Hagrid muttered, turning the page. There's a Ministry of Magic? Harry asked, before he could stop himself. Course, said Hagrid. They wanted Dumbledore for Minister of course, but he would never leave Hogwarts, so old Cornelius Fudge got the job. Bungler if there was a one, so he pelts Dumbledore with owls every morning asking for advice. But what does a Ministry of Magic do? Well, their main job is to keep it from the Muggles that there's still witches and wizards up and down the country. Why? Why? Blimey, Harry, everyone would be wanting magic solution to their problems. Nah, we are best left alone. At this moment, the boat bumped gently into the harbour wall. Hagrid folded up his newspaper, and they clambered up to the stone steps onto the street. Passers-by stared a lot at Hagrid as they walked through the little town to the station. Harry couldn't blame them. Not only Hagrid was twice as tall as anyone else, he kept pointing at perfectly ordinary things like parking meters and saying loudly, "See that, Harry? Things these muggles dream up, eh?" "Hagrid," said Harry, panting a bit as he ran to keep up. "Did you say there are dragons at Gringotts?" "Well, so they say," said Hagrid. "Cricky, I would like a dragon." "You would like one. Wanted one ever since I was a child. Here we go." They had reached the station. There was a train to London in 5 minutes' time. Hagrid, who didn't understand Muggle money, as he called it, gave the bill to Harry so he could buy their tickets. People stared more than ever on the train. Hagrid took up the 2 seats and sat knitting what looked like a canary yellow circus tent. "Still got your letter, Harry?" he asked as he counted stitches. Harry took the parchment envelope out of his pocket. "Good," said Hagrid. "There's a list, there's everything you need." Harry unfolded a second piece of paper he hadn't noticed the night before, and read, "Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, uniform. First-year students will require 3 sets of plain work robes, black, 1 plain pointed hat, black for the day wear, 1 pair of protective gloves, dragon hide or similar, 1 winter cloak, black, silver fastenings. Please note all that pupils' clothes should carry name tags. Course books. The Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1 by Miranda Goshawk. A History of Magic by Bathilda Bagshot. Magical Theory by Adalbert Waffling. A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration by Emmerich Switch. 1000 Magical Herbs and Fungi by Phil Despoe. Magical Draughts and Potions by Arsenius Jigger. Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them by Newt Scamander. The Dark Forces, A Guide to Self-Protection by Quentin Trimble. Other equipment: 1 wand, 1 cauldron, pewter standard size 2, 1 set of glasses or crystal files, 1 telescope set, 1 brass scales. Students may also bring an owl or a cat or a toad. Parents are reminded that the first years are not allowed their own broomsticks. Can we buy all this in London? Harry wondered aloud. If you know where to go, said Hagrid. Harry had never been to London before. Although Hagrid seemed to know where he was going, he was obviously not used to getting there in an ordinary way. He got stuck in the ticket barrier on the underground and complained loudly that the seats were too small and the trains are too slow. "I don't know how the Muggles manage without magic," he said as they climbed a broken down escalator and led up to a bustling road lined with shops. Hagrid was so huge that he parted the crowd easily. All Harry had to do was keep close behind him. They passed bookshops and music stores, hamburger restaurants and cinemas, but nowhere that looked as if it could sell you a magic wand. This was just another ordinary street full of ordinary people. Could there really be piles of wizard gold buried miles beneath them? Were there really shops that could sold spellbooks and broomsticks? Might this all be some huge joke that the Dursleys had cooked up? If Harry hadn't known that the Dursleys had no sense of humor, he might have thought so. Yet somehow, even though everything Hagrid told him so far was unbelievable, Harry couldn't help trusting him. "This is it," said Hagrid, coming to a halt. "The Leaky Cauldron. It's a famous place." It was a tiny, grubby-looking pub. If Hagrid hadn't pointed out, Harry wouldn't have noticed it was there. The people hurrying by didn't glance at it. Their eyes slid from the big bookshop on one side to the record shop on other, as if they couldn't see the Leaky Cauldron at all. In fact, Harry had the most peculiar feeling that only he and Hagrid could see it. Before he could mention this, Hagrid had steered him inside. For a famous place, it was very dark and shabby. A few old women were sitting in a corner, drinking tiny glasses of sherry. One of them was smoking a long pipe. A little man in a top hat was talking to the old bartender, who was when they walked in. Everyone seemed to know Hagrid. They waved, smiled at him, and the bartender reached for a glass saying, "The usuals, Hagrid?" "Can't, Tom. I'm on Hogwarts business," said Hagrid, clapping his great hand on Harry's shoulder and making Harry's knees buckle. "Good Lord," said the bartender, peering at Harry. Can this be?" The Leaky Cauldron had suddenly gone completely still and silent. "Bless my soul," whispered the old bartender. "Harry Potter! What an honor!" He hurried out from behind the bar, rushed toward Harry and seized his hand in tears in his eyes. "Welcome back, Mr. Potter. Welcome back." Harry didn't know what to say. Everyone was looking at him. The old woman with the pipe was puffing on it without realizing it had gone out. Hagrid was beaming. Then there was a great scrapping of chairs, and the next moment, Harry found himself shaking hands with everyone in the Leaky Cauldron. "Doris Crockford, Mr. Potter. Can't believe I'm meeting you at last. So proud, Mr. Potter. I'm just so proud. Always wanted to shake your hand. I'm all of a flutter. Delighted, Mr. Potter. Just can't tell you. Diggle's the name. Douglas Diggle." "I have seen you before," said Harry, as Douglas Diggle's top hat fell off in excitement. "You bowed to me once in a shop." "He remembers!" cried Douglas Diggle, looking around at everyone. "Did you hear that? He remembers me." Harry shook hands again and again. Doris Crockford kept coming back for more. A pale young man made his way forward, very nervously. One of his eyes was twitching. "Professor Quirrell," said Hagrid. "Harry, Professor Quirrell will be one of your teachers at Hogwarts." "Potter," stammered Professor Quirrell, grasping Harry's hand. "Can't tell you how pleased I am to meet you." "What sort of magic do you teach, Professor Quirrell?" "The defense against the dark arts," muttered Professor Quirrell, as though he would rather not think of it. Not that you need it, eh, Potter?" He laughed nervously. "You'll be getting all your equipment, I suppose?" "I have got to pick up a new book on vampires myself." He looked terrified at the very thought, but the others wouldn't let Professor Quirrell to keep Harry to himself. It almost took 10 minutes to get away from them all. At last, Hagrid managed to make himself heard over the babble. "Get a move on. Lots to buy. Come on, Harry." Doris Crockford shook Harry's hand one last time, and Hagrid led them through the bar and out into a small walled courtyard, where there was nothing but a trash can and few weeds. Hagrid grinned at Harry. "Told you, didn't I? Told you were famous." Even Professor Quirrell was trembling to meet ya. Mind you, he's usually trembling. Is he always that nervous? Oh yeah, poor block. Brilliant mind though. He was fine while he was studying out of books, but then he took an year off to get some first-hand experience. They say he met vampires in the Black Forest, and there was a nasty bit of trouble with a hag. Never been the same since. Scared of students, scared of his own subject. Now where's my umbrella? Vampires? Hags? Harry's head was swimming. Hagrid, meanwhile, was counting bricks in the wall above the trash can. 3 up, 2 across, he muttered. Right. Stand back, Harry. He tapped the wall 3 times with the point of his umbrella. The brick he had touched quivered. It wriggled in the middle. A small hole appeared. It grew wider and wider. A second later, they were facing an archway large even enough for Hagrid, an archway onto cobbled street that twisted and turned out of sight. Welcome, said Hagrid, to Diagon Alley. He grinned at Harry's amazement. They stepped through the archway. Harry looked quickly over his shoulder and saw the archway shrink instantly back into a solid wall. The sun shone brightly on a stack of cauldrons outside the nearest shop. Cauldrons, all sizes, copper, brass, pewter, silver, self-stirring, collapsible, and said a sign hanging over them. Yeah, you'll be needing one, said Hagrid, but we gotta get your money first. Harry wished he had about 8 more eyes. He turned his head in every direction as they walked up the street, trying to look at everything at once. The shops, the things outside them, the people doing their shopping. A plum woman outside, an apothecary, was shaking her head as they passed, saying, Dragon liver, 17 sickles an ounce. They're mad. A low, soft hooting came from a dark shop with a sign saying, Aelops Owl Emporium. 20, Screech Barn, brown and snowy. Several boys of about Harry's age had their noses pressed against a window with broomsticks in it. Look, Harry heard one of them say, the new Nimbus 2000, fast as ever. There were shops selling robes, shops selling telescopes and strange silver instruments Harry had never seen before. Windows stacked with barrels of bat spills and eel's eyes, tottering piles of spellbooks, quills, and rolls of parchment, potion bottles, globes of the moon. Gringotts, said Hagrid. They had reached a snowy white building that towered over little shops. Standing beside its burnished bronze door, wearing a uniform of scarlet and gold was, Yeah, that's a goblin, said Hagrid quietly as they walked up the white stone step toward him. The goblin was about a head shorter than Harry. He had a swarthy, clever face, a pointed beard, and Harry noticed a very long fingers and feet. He bowed as they walked inside. Now they were facing a second pair of doors. This time it was silver, with words engraved upon them. Enter, stranger, but take heed of what awaits the sin of greed. For those who take, but do not earn, must pay most dearly in their turn. So if you seek beneath our floor a treasure that was never yours, thief, you have been warned, beware of finding more than treasure here. Like I said, yeah, you have been mad to try and rob it, said Hagrid. A pair of goblins bowed them through the silver doors, and they were in a vast marble hall. About 100 more goblins were sitting on high stools behind a long counter, scribbling in large ledgers, weighing coins in brass scales, examining precious stones through eyeglasses. There were too many doors to count leading off the hall, and yet more goblins were showing people in and out of these. Hagrid and Harry made out for the counter. Morning, said Hagrid to a free goblin. We have come to take some money out of Mr. Harry Potter's safe. You have his keys, sir? Got it here somewhere, said Hagrid, and he started emptying his pockets onto counter, scattering a handful of moldy dog biscuits over the goblin's book of numbers. The goblin wrinkled his nose. Harry watched the goblin on their right weighing a pile of rubies as big as glowing coals. Got it, the little devil, said Hagrid at last, holding up a tiny golden key. The goblin looked at it closely. That seemed to be in order. And I have also got a letter from Professor Dumbledore, said Hagrid importantly, throwing out his chest. It's about you-know-what. In Vault 713, the goblin read the letter carefully. Very well, he said, handing it back to Hagrid. I'll have someone to take you down into both vaults. Griphook! Griphook was yet another goblin. Once Hagrid had crammed all the dog biscuits back inside his pockets, he and Harry followed Griphook toward one of the doors leading off the hall. What's the you-know-what in Vault 713? Harry asked. Can't tell you that, said Hagrid mysteriously. Very secret. Hogwarts business. Dumbledore's trusted me. More than my job's worth to tell you that. Griphook held the door open for them. Harry, who was expected more marble, was surprised. They were in a narrow stone passageway lit with flaming torches. It sloped steeply downward and there were little railway tracks on the floor. Griphook whistled and a small cart came hurtling up the track toward them. They climbed in, Hagrid with some difficulty, and were off. At first, they were just hurled through a maze of twisting passages. Harry tried to remember left, right, left, middle fork, right, left, but it was impossible. The rattling cart seemed to know its own way because Griphook wasn't steering. Harry's eyes stung as the cold air rushed past them, but he kept them wide open. Once, he thought he saw a burst of fire at the end of the passage that twisted around to see if it was a dragon, but too late. They plunged even deeper, passing underground lake where huge stalactites and stalagmites grew from ceiling and floor. I never knew, Harry called to Hagrid over the noise of the cart. What's the difference between stalagmite and stalactite? Stalagmite got an M in it, said Hagrid. And don't ask me questions, just know I think I'm gonna be sick. He didn't look very green, and when the cart stopped at the last beside a small door in the passage wall, Hagrid got out and had to lean against the wall to stop his knees from trembling. Griphook unlocked the door. A lot of green smoke came blowing out, and as it cleared, Harry gasped. Inside were mounds of gold coins, columns of silver, heaps of little bronze nuts. All yours, smiled Hagrid. All Harry's. It was incredible. The Dursleys couldn't have known about this, or they had it from him faster than blinking. How often had they complained how much Harry cost them to keep, and all the time there had a small fortune belonging to him buried deep under London. Hagrid helped Harry pile some of it into a bag. The gold ones are galleons, he explained. 17 silver sickles to a galleon, and the 29 nuts to a sickle. It's easy enough. Right, that should be enough for a couple of terms. We'll keep the rest safe for you. He turned to Griphook. Vault 713 now, please, and can we go more slowly? One speed only, said Griphook. They were going even deeper now, gathering speed. The air became colder and colder as they hurled round tight corners. They went rattling over an underground ravine, and Harry leaned over the side to try to see what was down at the dark bottom. But Hagrid groaned and pulled him back by the scruff of his neck. Vault 713 had no keyhole. Stand back, said Griphook importantly. He stroked the door gently with one of his long fingers and it simply melted away. If anyone but a Gringotts goblin tried that, they would be sucked through the door and trapped in here, said Griphook. How often do you check to see if anyone's inside? Harry asked. About once every 10 years, said Griphook with rather nasty grin. Something really extraordinary had to be inside this top security vault. Harry was sure, and he leaned forward eagerly, expecting to see fabulous jewels at the very least. But at first, he thought it was empty. Then he noticed a grubby little package wrapped up in brown paper lying on the floor. Hagrid picked it up and tucked it deep inside his coat. Harry longed to know what was it, but he knew better than to ask. Come on, back in the infernal cart, and don't talk to me on the way back. It's best if I keep my mouth shut, said Hagrid. One wild cart ride later, they stood blinking in the sunlight outside Gringotts. Harry didn't know where to run first. Now that he had a bag full of money, he didn't have to know how many galleons there were to pound to know that he was holding more money than he had in his whole life, more money than ever Dudley had ever had. Might as well have to get a uniform, said Hagrid, nodding toward Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions. Listen, Harry, would you mind if I slipped off a pick-me-up in the leaky cauldron? I hate them Gringotts carts. He did still look a bit sick, so Harry entered Madame Malkin's shop alone, feeling nervous. Madame Malkin was a squat, smiling witch dressed all in mauve. Hogwarts, dear? She said, when Harry started to speak. Got the lot here. Another young man being fitted up just now. In fact, in the back of the shop, a boy with a pale, pointed face was standing on a footstool, while a second witch pinned up his long black robes. Madame Malkin stood Harry on a stool next to him, slipped a long robe over his head, and began to pin it on the right length. "Hello," said the boy. "Hogwarts too?" "Yes," said Harry. "My father's next door buying my books, and my mother's up street looking for wands," said the boy. He had a bold, drawling voice. "Then I'm going to drag them off to Took at racing brooms. I don't see why first years can't have their own. I think I'll bully father getting to me one, and I'll snuggle it in somehow." Harry was strongly reminded of Dudley. "Have you got your own broom?" The boy went on. "No," said Harry. "Play Quidditch at all?" No," Harry said again, wondering what on earth Quidditch be. "I do. Father says it's a crime if I am not picked up to play for my house, and I must say, I agree. Know what house you will be in yet?" "No," said Harry, feeling more stupid by the minute. "Well, no one really knows until they get there, do they? But I know I will be in Slytherin. All our family have been. Imagine being in Hufflepuff. I think I would leave, wouldn't you?" Said Harry, wishing he could say something a bit more interesting. "I say, look at that man," said the boy suddenly, nodding toward the front window. Hagrid was standing there, grinning at Harry and pointing at two large ice creams to show he couldn't come in. "That's Hagrid," said Harry, pleased to know something the boy didn't. "He works at Hogwarts." "Oh," said the boy, "I have heard of him. He's a sort of servant, isn't he?" "He's the gamekeeper," said Harry. He was liking the boy less and less every second. "Yes, exactly. I heard he's a sort of a savage. Lives in a hut on school grounds, and every now and then he gets drunk, tries to do magic, and ends up setting fire to his bed." "I think he's brilliant," said Harry coldly. "Do you?" said the boy, with slight sneer. "Why is he with you? Where are your parents?" "They are dead," said Harry shortly. He didn't feel much like going on to the matter with his boy. "Oh, sorry," said another, not sounding sorry at all. "But they were our kind, weren't they?" "They were witch and wizard, if that's what you mean. I really don't think they should let the other sort in, do you? They are just not the same. They have never been brought up to our ways. Some of them have never even heard of Hogwarts until they get the letter. Imagine. I think they should keep it in the old wizarding families. What's your surname, anyway?" But before Harry could answer, Madame Malkin said, "That's you done, my dear." And Harry, not sorry for an excuse to stop talking to the boy, hopped down from this footstool. "Well, I'll see you at Hogwarts, I suppose," said the drawling boy. Harry was rather quiet as he ate the ice cream Hagrid had bought him, chocolate and raspberry with the chopped nuts. "What's up?" said Hagrid. "Nothing," Harry lied. They stopped to buy parchment and quills. Harry cheered up a bit when he found out a bottle of ink that changed color as he wrote. When they had left the shop, he said, "Hagrid, what's Quidditch?" "Blimey, Harry, I keep forgetting how little you know, not knowing about Quidditch." "Don't make me feel worse," said Harry. He told Hagrid about the pale boy and Madame Malkin's, and he said people from Muggle families should even be allowed in. "You're not from a Muggle family. If he had known who you were, he's grown up knowing your name if his parents were visiting folk. You saw what everyone in Leaky Cauldron was like when they saw you. Anyway, what does he know about it?" Some of the best I ever saw were the only ones with magic in them in a long time of muggles. Look at your mum. Look what she had for her sister. So what is Quidditch? It's our sport, a wizard sport. It's like soccer in Muggle world. Everyone follows Quidditch, played up in the air on broomsticks, and there's 4 balls. Sorta hard to explain the rules. And what are Slytherin and Hufflepuff? Schoolhouses. There's 4. Everyone says Hufflepuff are a lot of duffers, but I bet I meant Hufflepuff, said Harry gloomily. Better Hufflepuff than Slytherin, said Hagrid darkly. There's not a single witch or wizard who went bad who wasn't in Slytherin. You know who was one. You know who was at Hogwarts. Years and years ago, said Hagrid. They bought Harry's school books in a shop called Flourish and Blotts, where the shelves were stacked onto the ceiling with books as large as paving stones bound in leather, books the size of postage stamps and cars of silks, books full of peculiar symbols and few books with nothing in them at all. Even Dudley, who never read anything, would have been wild to get his hands on some of these. Hagrid almost had to drag Harry away from curses and counter-curses, bewitch your friends and befuddle your enemies with the latest revenges, hair loss, jelly legs, tongue-tying and much more. Professor Vindict's Viridian. I was trying to find out how to curse Dudley. I'm not saying that it's not a good idea, but they are not to use magic in the Muggle world except in very special circumstances, said Hagrid. And anyway, you couldn't work any of the curses yet. You'll need a lot to study before you get at that level. Hagrid wouldn't let Harry buy a solid gold cauldron either. It says pewter on your list, but they got a nice set of scales for weighing potion ingredients and a collapsible brass telescope. Then they visited apothecary, which was fascinating enough to make for its horrible smell, a mixture of bad eggs and rotted cabbages, barrels of slimy stuffed food on the floor, jars of herbs, dried roots, and bright powders lined the walls. Bundles of feathers, strings of fangs, and snarled claws hung from ceiling, while Hagrid asked the man himself, examined silver unicorn horns at 21 galleons each, and minuscule glittery black beetle eyes, 5 nuts a scoop. Outside the apothecary, Hagrid checked Harry's list. Just your one left. Yeah, and I still haven't got your birthday present. Harry felt himself go red. Oh, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. Tell you what, I'll get your animal. Not a toad. Toads went out of fashion years ago. You'd be laughed at. And I don't like cats. They make me sneeze. I'll get you an owl. All kinds. What owls? They are dead, useful, carrier mail, and everything. 20 minutes later, they left Elop's Owl Emporium, which had been dark and full of rustling and flickering. Harry now carried a large cage that held the beautiful snowy owl, fast asleep with her head under her wing. He couldn't stop stammering his thanks, sounding just like Professor Quirrell. Don't mention it, said Hagrid gruffly. Don't expect you had a lot of presents from Dursleys. Just Ollivanders left now. Only place for wands. Oliver's, and yeah, you got a best wand. A magic wand. This was what Harry had been really looking forward to. The last shop was narrow and shabby. Peeling gold letters over the door read, Ollivanders, makers of fine wands since 382 BC. A single one lay on a faded purple cushion in the dusty window. A tinkling bell rang somewhere in depths of the shop as they stepped inside. It was a tiny place, empty except for a single spindly chair that Hagrid sat on to wait. Harry felt strangely as though he had entered a very strict library. He swallowed a lot of new questions that had just occurred to him, and looked instead at the thousands of narrow boxes piled neatly right up to the ceiling. For some reason, the back of his neck prickled. The very dust and silence there seemed to tingle with some secret magic. Good afternoon, said a soft voice. Harry jumped. Hagrid must have jumped too, because there was a loud crunching noise and he got quickly off the spindly chair. An old man was standing before them, his wide, pale eyes shining like moons through the gloom of the shop. "Hello," said Harry awkwardly. "Ah, yes," said the man. Yes, I thought I would be seeing you soon, Harry Potter. It wasn't a question. You have your mother's eyes. It seems only yesterday she was in here herself, buying her first wand. 10¼ inches long, swishy, made of willow. Nice wand for charm work. Mr. Ollivander moved closer to Harry. Harry wished he would blink. Those silvery eyes were a bit creepy. Your father, on the other hand, favored a mahogany wand. 11 inches, pliable, a little more power and excellent for transfiguration. Well, I say your father favored it. It's really the one that chooses the wizard, of course. Mr. Ollivander had come so close that he and Harry were almost nose to nose. Harry could see himself reflected in those misty eyes. And that's where Mr. Ollivander touched the lightning scar on Harry's forehead with a long white finger. I'm sorry to say, I sold the one that did it, he said softly. 13½ inches. You, powerful wand, very powerful. And in the wrong hands, well, if I had known what that wand was going out into the world to do. He shook his head and then, to Harry's relief, spotted Hagrid. Rubius Hagrid, how nice to see you again. Oak, 16 inches, rather bendy, wasn't it? It was good, sir, yes, said Hagrid. Good one, that one, but I suppose they snapped it in half when you got expelled, said Mr. Ollivander suddenly stern. Yes, they did, yes, said Hagrid, shuffling his feet. I have still got the pieces though, he added brightly. But you don't use them, said Mr. Ollivander sharply. Oh no, sir, said Hagrid quickly. Harry noticed he gripped his pink umbrella very tightly as he spoke. Said Mr. Ollivander, giving Hagrid a piercing look. Well now, Mr. Potter, let me say. He pulled out a long tape measure with the silver markings out of his pocket. Which is your wand arm? Well, I'm right-handed, said Harry. Hold out your arm. That's it. He measured Harry from shoulder to finger, then wrist to elbow, shoulder to floor, knee to armpit, and round his head. As he measured, he said, every Ollivander wand has a cove of powerful magical substance. Mr. Potter, we can use unicorn hairs, phoenix tail feathers, and the heartstrings of dragons. Now 2 Ollivander wands are the same, just as no 2 unicorns, dragons, or phoenixes are quite the same, and of course, you will never get such good results with another wizard's wand. Harry suddenly realized that the tape measure was measuring between the nostrils, was doing this on its own. Mr. Ollivander was fitting around the shelves, taking down boxes. That will do, he said, and the tape measure crumpled into a heap on the floor. Right then, Mr. Potter, try this one. Beechwood and a dragon heartstring, 9 inches, nice and flexible. Just take it and give it away. Harry took the wand and, feeling foolish, waved it around a bit, but Mr. Ollivander snatched it out of his hand and almost at once. Maple and a phoenix feather, 7 inches, quite whippy. Try. Harry tried, but he had hardly raised the wand when it, too, was snatched back by Mr. Ollivander. No. Here, ebony and a unicorn hair, 8½ inches, springy. Go on, try it out. Harry tried and tried. He had no idea what Mr. Ollivander was waiting for. The pile of tried wands was mounting higher and higher on the spindly chair, but the more wands Mr. Ollivander pulled out from the shelves, the happier he seemed to become. A tricky customer, eh? Not to worry, we will find the perfect match here somewhere. I wonder now. Yes, why not? Unusual combination. Holy and a phoenix feather, 11 inches, nice and supple. Harry took the wand. He felt a sudden warmth in his fingers. He raised the wand above his head, brought it swishing down through the dusty air, and a stream of red and gold sparks shot from the end like a firework, throwing dancing spots of light onto the walls. Hagrid whooped and clapped, and Mr. Ollivander cried, "Oh, bravo! Yes, indeed, oh, very good! Well, 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 how curious! How very curious!" He put Harry's wand back into its box and wrapped it in brown paper, still muttering, "Curious, curious." "Sorry," said Harry, "but what's curious?" Mr. Ollivander fixed Harry with his pale stare. "I remember every wand I was sold, Mr. Potter. Every single wand. It so happens that the phoenix, whose tail feather is in your wand, gave another feather. Just another one. It's very curious indeed that you should be destined for this wand when its brother, why, its brother gave you that scar." Harry swallowed. "Yes, 13.5 inches. You. Curious indeed how these things happen. The wand chooses the wizard, remember? I think we must expect great things from you, Mr. Potter. After all, he who must not be named did great things. Terrible! Yes, but great." Harry shivered. He wasn't sure he liked Mr. Ollivander too much. He paid 7 gold galleons for his wand, and Mr. Ollivander bought them from his shop. The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky as Harry and Hagrid made their way back to Diagon Alley, back through the wall, back through the leaky cauldron, now empty. Harry didn't speak at all as they walked down the road. He didn't even notice how much people were gawking at them on underground, laden as they were with all their funny-shaped packages, with the snowy owl asleep in its cage on Harry's lap. Up another escalator, out to Paddington Station. Harry only realized where they were when Hagrid tapped him on the shoulder. "Got time for a bit to eat before your train leaves," he said. He bought Harry him a hamburger, and they sat down on plastic seats to eat them. Harry kept looking around. Everything looked so strange, somehow. "You all right, Harry?" "You're very quiet," said Hagrid. Harry wasn't sure how he could explain. He had just had the best birthday of his life, and yet he chewed his hamburger, trying to find the words. "Everyone thinks I'm special," he said at last. "All those people in the leaky cauldron, Professor Quirrell, Mr. Ollivander. But I don't know anything about magic at all. How can they expect great things? I'm famous, and I can't even remember what I'm famous for. I don't know what happened when sorry, I mean the night my parents died." Hagrid leaned across the table. Behind the wild beard and eyebrows he wore a very kind smile. "Don't worry, Harry. You'll learn just fast enough. Everyone starts at the beginning of Hogwarts. You'll be just fine. Just be yourself. I know it's hard. You've been singled out, and that's why all is hard. But you'll have a great time at Hogwarts. I did, still do, as a matter of fact." Hagrid helped Harry onto the train that would take him back to the Dursleys, then handed him an envelope. "Your ticket for Hogwarts," he said. "1st of September, King's Cross. It's all your ticket. Any problems with the Dursleys, send me a letter with your owl. She'll know where to find me. See you soon, Harry. The train pulled out of the station. Harry wanted to watch Hagrid until he was out of sight. He rose in his seat and pressed his nose against the window, but he blinked and Hagrid had gone. That's it, folks. The travel to the world of magic, the school of witchcraft and wizardry, Hogwarts, starts from the very next chapter. Keep tuned. See ya.